Welcome to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and their journey. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corkin here. I'm the co-host of this show, and every week we talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. You check out our archives. We've got lots of great episodes there, and of course, this episode is brought to you by EO San Francisco. EO San Francisco is the Bay Area chapter for Entrepreneurs Organization, which is a global peer-to-peer network of more than 16,000, actually I think 18,000 now, influential business owners across about 200 chapters, 60-plus countries. If you are the founder, co-founder, owner, or controlling shareholder of a company that generates over 7 figures a year in revenues, and you want to connect with other like-minded successful entrepreneurs, EO is for you. And you can learn more about how it works and come to a test drive by going to eonetwork.org/San Francisco. All right, I'm excited about today's guest. His name is Eric Toscano. He is the CEO and founder of Tenant Law Group. I know him quite well because he and I are in a EO forum together, actually started one together, and is one of the most entrepreneurial lawyers that I know. And as a recovering lawyer myself, I have met quite a few entrepreneurial lawyers, and most of them are not as entrepreneurial as Eric is. And so he's really an interesting guy, and I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. But Eric, let's start. I always love starting people with knowing a little bit more about what they were like as a kid. I know you had this really strong relationship with your grandfather growing up, who had a car lot. I believe an RV lot also, too. Sold cars and RVs, correct?
That's right.
And one of your first foundational working experience was he would pay you to go clean things around the car lot. What were you cleaning? Carburetors? What are you cleaning?
I the clear memory I have was, first of all, thank you for the kind introduction. Appreciate it, John. It's great to be here, and thank you for hosting me. My memory is, I think he gave me like $10. He's like, just go organize a bunch of, it was like a storage closet. So that was my job, to like organize a storage closet. But I was
How old were you here when you were doing this?
9 or 10, because I was living in Toscano still. So I was like
clearly trying to keip you busy.
Yeah, just trying to keep me busy, stay out of his way. Exactly.
Yeah, and so he had a car lot. And talk a little bit about that. What you learned from this entrepreneurial grandfather of yours.
So he was an entrepreneur pretty much his whole life. So this is my father's father. This is Grandpa Louis Gigi Toscano, first generation American. His parents were both immigrants from Italy. Grew up speaking the dialect, and then when he went to kindergarten, didn't speak any English. It was really funny. Born in the U.S., didn't speak any English. So after he got back from World War II, he was in the Navy. I think he started a melon cooling business. Like, he just started businesses. He may have worked for a car lot. No, he started selling cars fairly early on. He started a melon cooling business at some point. This was all
what is a melon cooling business?
It was like, okay, so Los Banos, which is where he was born, raised. The whole family's from there. That's where
it's in the Central Valley of California.
It's in the Central Valley. It's in Merced County,
which is a very big agricultural area.
Big agricultural area. Like, the produce it's famous for are melons and tomatoes. Like, it's really popular. And then there's all sorts of dairies as well too. So I don't know. I guess there was a need for cooling melons, and he started this melon cooling business. I don't know if it was still in existence. I know my dad did some picking of melons. I don't know. It was for my grandpa at some point, but that was a business. I'm not quite sure what happened to it. This was all pre-me, but I know that I think he had Gigi Auto Sales first. His nickname was Gigi, Louis Gigi Toscano. And I think he operated that. He opened that in his 30s. Because I know it was like 1964. He was 40 when he launched Toscano Ford. So that was a car dealership right off the main drag in Pacheco Pass, right down 152 in Los Banos. It's still a Ford dealership. I think it's a different Ford dealership now. And he ended up opening it up, and he ended up opening an RV lot across the street. I think he opened that up in the 70s. And at one point in the 1970s, he was the biggest leaser of Airstreams. Toscano RV was, like, in the Western US. Like, he won a bunch of awards for Airstream sales and leasing. Yeah. So that's the person that I grew up watching, and not just like how he interacted with his employees and his team, but, how he would close a sale. And that was really fun. My dad was the general manager at the time. So here I am, basically moved there when I was born, to 10. And those were like the formative years. I would go to the car dealership, and my dad would let me in his office, and I'd watch him on the phone, and I'd watch Grandpa and them do their thing. So those
And
were very formative
since you
memories.
mentioned watching him close a sale, how did he close a sale? Do you have some secret strategy or something?
I have this clear image in my mind of the guy who was chain smoking throughout the 80s, right? So he's got like a cigarette in his fingers right here. He's wearing a suit and tie. He's got his hair all slicked back, like, dark haired Italian guy. And he's like walking across the car lot. He's got his arm around someone and he's doing this. I think there's actually a commercial where he's doing it.
He's like a caricature of a car salesman.
He's a full caricature, but he was really effective. He did a good job. He was, I always say he was kind of a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah.
In Los Banos. It was a small. When I left, it was about 10,000 people. So
for a child of immigrants, I know he built it to multi-millions in sales, right? I mean, it was a significant business that he built.
Yeah. So from what I understand from my dad, I remember I was talking to him about this a few years ago. I think he said that at its peak around the mid 80s, they had 50 or so employees. And I did the 2023 equivalent because I remember converting it. They did about 5 million in revenue. So yeah, it was a multi-million dollar business. I mean, in a pretty small town.
Yeah, but significant anyway. So you learned a lot from him, and you, even though the family was doing well and had this successful, thriving business in a small town, as you put it, they taught you the ethic of going to work, and you actually had a job working in Delhi at 13 years old.
Yeah. So fast forward, we moved. I was 10 years old. We moved. My dad's family's from Los Banos. My mom's family from the city of Sonoma. So we moved there when I was 10. And I think the summer before high school, I got a job at the Sonoma cheese factory. That was like my first actual hourly job as a deli clerk.
Still there. If you go, anyone goes to visit the town of Sonoma, it's still there. It's an institution. Everyone goes there.
Still there. I had some very fun memories. I still am in touch with like some people that they were friends. We all ended up working there. And I think I started at like $5.15 an hour, but it was the 90s.
Yeah. But I mean, the fact that you're 13 working there, that's impressive.
Yeah. I think it was right before my 14th birthday. Yeah. So, I probably wasn't 13 there that long, but yeah, they hired me and,
So you also sold Cutco knives in college, and then you ended up having this foundational experience where you decided to go off to Italy. I think this was after college. You ended up spending a couple of years there and starting businesses in Italy, which to me sounds really intimidating. Talk a little about these businesses you created.
Yeah, so I had studied abroad as a junior. Absolutely fell in love with it. I was there for 3 months. I was like, this is not the end. I need more of this. And so I graduate. I worked for about a year and a half, and then I bought a one-way ticket. I actually had a job lined up. So I had a job as an English teacher at a private language school in Italy. And so that was my job. And I did that for the first year. And while that process was going on, I think I was there on like a student visa. I'm still not quite sure how that worked out, but whatever. I was technically studying Italian, I guess, and working part-time at this job. But I realized I wanted to do more. I mean, you're kind of limited on, I think, life experience and certainly like, what you can earn and to, while you're living overseas on a teacher's salary. I mean, it was anyway. So I was in the process of getting recognized as an Italian citizen through Ancestry. So I was able to get it through my mother, grandmother, who was then living, great grandfather, who had passed away at the time. But he was born in Italy, came to the US, gave birth to my grandma, and then he became naturalized. So because Italy recognizes citizenship through blood, he was still an Italian citizen when he was here in the US, when he gave birth to when my grandmother was born. And so citizenship passed to her, passed to mom, passed to me. So the way they described it as the consulate is that we were all citizens. We just didn't have it recognized yet. So it was kind of a complicated process. And I thought to myself, once I was recognized, it was like a full year and I got my citizenship. I said, you know what, this would be a really cool business. I bet you there's tons of people who, whether for sentimental reasons or maybe they want to move to Europe. I don't know. It was 2001, 2002. Maybe they would, enjoy learning about it. And so I started Italian Citizenship and Genealogy Services in, I think, the summer of 2002. The idea was
what was the early days like? Was it hard? I mean, this is kind of early internet days, right? I mean, it's like Google had been around for a couple of years in 2001, but how did you get clients?
So interestingly enough, I remember like coming up with like a very rudimentary business plan. I had like, this was like my first business plan. I mean, I was 24 years old. So it was like, I was already a college grad. I think my biggest expense was like a PC that I bought in Italy. And then my biggest expense was paying someone to build a website. Like that was a big expense back then.
Yeah.
Now it linked with
Wasn't easy.
PayPal. It was, yeah, I mean, it was, I didn't really know, I didn't have a technical background. So I was really relying on someone else. And it was funny because the guy who built the website was a former startup during the first .com bubble, like a founder whose company didn't make it. And he had a little free time. So he was like, you know what, I'll build you a website. And I met with him and he basically did it over a month. So it's kind of cool to interact with someone like that. But yeah.
So
and then go ahead.
Did you get clients? Did it take a while to get clients?
So it was interesting because so in 2002, I got clients. My only advertising was Google AdWords. I think it was then called Google AdWords. So I was an early adopter of that in 2002. And I would just get, link my website up to PayPal and people would want to get translations, which I would do for a fee. And then certificates, like get a birth or a birth, marriage or death certificate from an ancestor that they would need as part of their Italian citizenship application. And I would do that for a fee too. And so and then link my PayPal to a bank account and that's it. And so I could charge US rates for it, what people would pay. Meanwhile, I'm living, it's just a solopreneur just doing my thing over in Italy. So it worked out great. And I would, do the research, do the translations and yeah.
And
great.
You started another business at the same time. So you were also, I think it was a translation business or a tutoring business at the same time?
I started my own English school. So my first year, I lived in a small town called Saluzzo, which is about an hour south of Turin in the Piedmont region. And then I moved to be closer to some relatives and friends that I knew that I had met. And that's in the Veneto region. And the city was called Montebelluna. And it was a cool, industrial, very entrepreneurial city. All my friends in their 20s had their own little shops. It was really cool. It's like kind of went against the stereotype of La Dolce Vita Italians. Like these were active, very much business-minded people. So they were very supportive of me. And I opened an English school called the English Language Institute of Montebelluna. So that was a different experience. So marketing for that one, I remember printing out, no joke, I printed out flyers and I went and personally delivered on a bicycle, riding around Montebelluna in mailboxes.
Now that sounds very Italian, though. I mean, there must have been a basket on the front and everything. You're like ding ding, going through the cobblestone streets.
Yeah, it was fun, and I ended up getting. I had enough students to sustain myself. So between that and the English Language Institute and Italian citizenship, that was enough to basically sustain me. I didn't say I was making a killing by any means, but certainly I could survive. And I had a blast. I was there for 3 years.
So, but the longer term plan was you're going to come back to the States. You were going to go to law school, which you ended up doing. You go to law school. And it sounds to me like you probably had an idea that you'd maybe be doing something entrepreneurial. Was the idea that I would start a public interest law firm representing tenants, or how did that come about?
No, I mean, I did have a sense that I wanted to go out and start something up on my own. It was kind of in my DNA from pretty young age. And so I knew that was probably going to end up happening. But I worked for, I graduated in 2009. I worked for a big firm for a couple of years. It didn't vibe. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do with my career. I kind of stumbled into having left the firm with really no plan. I didn't have another firm I was going to because I didn't want to continue working at big firms. It wasn't a great experience. So I wanted to do something different. And I had a pro bono client who offered to pay me. And that basically became, I remember putting my name on letterhead, Eric L. Toscano, Esquire. And all of a sudden I had a client and I guess I have a firm now. Okay, cool. And that happened a week after I left the big firm I was working at, because I told this person on my way out, I'm leaving. And her response was, "Oh, sorry to hear that. I'd pay you to do this work." And I said, "I will do that work if you pay."
Yeah. It's funny because actually I'm looking at your LinkedIn here and it says that this started in November of 2012 and I started my firm right around the same time.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the crazy thing about it too is that it had gotten so much easier to start a law firm. If you're scrappy, if you look at these big firms and they spent tons of money to put these big books on the wall, right? And they have expensive real estate and they have a receptionist up front. But I looked at other, lawyers that were able to keep their expenses way down and was, lawyers charge enough that you didn't need that many clients in order to, keep the lights on.
That was exactly my experience. I think officially I launched, but I wasn't really marketing it in November. I think I actually started trying to market myself I've you've heard me say this before. It was basically I practiced door law, so like kind of whatever came into the door. I was a patient attorney for a little bit. I did business, entities for a while, and then I got my first landlord-tenant case. That's kind of what got me interested in tenant rights law in mid 2013. But I remember distinctly, I sent out like a zillion messages on LinkedIn. Hey, I started my own firm. And one of my former colleagues at the big firm sent me a referral. And he basically said, I have this client who needs a lot of attention that I don't have time for, but great client. And that person I ended up working with that client for a really, really long time. We have a great relationship. And I remember that one client made my first full month, January, profitable. It was great. Because
yeah,
like
it's
you
amazing that difference, right?
Yeah, it was so easy to start a firm and like you just don't have that much overhead.
Yeah. Of course, the risk then is you got one client, right? That person leaves, and it's like, oh no.
No, you're right. But it was like it paid the bills for like the first month. I definitely was trying to get more clients, but it's tricky when you practice door law because you're getting referrals based on who you are, not what you can do for clients.
So talk a little bit about, I know you had a firm with a couple of partners for a little bit, and eventually you zeroed in on this idea of representing tenants. Now, what I love about that is it really distinguishes the firm that you represented, that you created. And it is also, for those who don't realize, it's the most entrepreneurial type of law that you can practice. Like, in some ways, like being a lawyer and serving traditional clients like business clients is kind of old school in a sense, right? There isn't anything scrappy or entrepreneurial about it. But for you, you are representing people that have experienced, in some cases, really horrendous conditions. But you also have to be very selective about which clients you represent, because if you choose the wrong clients to represent, then you will lose your shirt, right? Because you're putting the money up and you only get paid if it's successful. So that's why I think it's so entrepreneurial. So let's talk a little bit about how you decided on this as a practice area.
I would say I decided on this as a practice area. I took my first case, and I told you this story, probably heard this story before, maybe. I took my first case. It was a referral through the Bar Association of San Francisco. And my client was a woman named Virginia. And she didn't know what to do, but she knew that she was in a bad situation. She had she had a rent-controlled apartment in the city of San Francisco. And one day she came home from work. This is an immigrant from El Salvador, 3 sons, I think ages like 10 to 2, and single mom working 2 or 3 jobs, super sympathetic, paying low rent at a rent-controlled apartment. One day she has a sewage leak, and it's disgusting. Like raw sewage out of the sink, floor. She calls the property manager, calls the owner. She's trying to like get some help, and no one will answer. No one will help. She ends up mopping like raw sewage up by herself in between her jobs while making sure her kids like dealing with this like stench. So she ends up just eventually her young son ends up developing a rash. Eventually she just like leaves most of her belongings, what she had, and just walks out the door and calls the bar association. I think she was living with family or friends. So she contacts me. I'd never done a tenant rights case before. I contacted some people I knew in the community to kind of give me some guidance, filed a lawsuit on her behalf, and ended up securing a settlement for her that worked out really well for her, was able to give her a fresh start, allow her to go rent an apartment for her sons. I still remember handing the check to her. It was a really special day. Still in touch with this client too. She's actually done volunteered to be, to help me with some marketing, which is great. And it was that point I was like, oh, this is my calling. I'm a plaintiff's attorney. I've been doing this defense work, but I'm a plaintiff's attorney. This is fantastic, because it was also, a contingency fee that paid pretty well also. So I was like, I could do more of this. This is cool.
Yeah. And so then you pivot the firm, you rename the firm, all focused on this, and talk a little bit about the early years. Like, did it take a while to build a reputation in this area?
Yeah. So I merged my solo practice into a partnership for a couple years, where our focus was business litigation, which were mostly my clients, personal injury, and tenant rights. So we had like 1 hourly and 2 contingency practices. After a couple of years, I ended up withdrawing and then starting what is now Tenant Law Group. It was originally Toscano Law Group in January of 2016. I still had all 3 of those practice areas. yeah, I guess I was doing all three, and then I joined an organization, a law firm management organization, how to manage a small law firm. And one of the first masterminds I went into, it was like, you have to pick a practice area. Just pick one, and that's what you're going to be good at, and that's the one you want to do. And I thought about it, and it was like, okay, what is the one practice area? Personal injury, there's a million attorneys doing it. Business litigation, there's a million attorneys. Tenant rights, that's kind of interesting. I love it. I love working with mostly indigent clients. I love the challenges and strategies of being a plaintiff's attorney and trying to navigate your way to a successful resolution. And just being a plaintiff's attorney really called to me. So I chose that practice area, and conveniently, Toscano Law Group still had the same initials. It was still TLG. So
that did work out well. Now I know that for plaintiff side firms, it's oftentimes not a linear path, right? There can be booming, big successful years, and there can be down years. How have you dealt with those types of like roller coasters?
As well as I can. I guess I'll put it that way. I mean, what I'll say is, like, truthfully, I mean, we've been in business for 9 years. I've had growth every single year except for COVID on top line revenue, which has been exciting. 2 years were not profitable, but I would say one was just almost break even. The other one was a loss. But they've otherwise been profitable years. The challenge is having a company where you do the work today and you'll get paid a year and a half from now, but you don't know when exactly, and you don't know how much. But you need to make hiring decisions today based on the pipeline you have now. So over the years,
if you took any random business owner and you said, these are the circumstances, they'd be like, how the heck do I do that?
Well, the answer, I mean, there's a lot of answers. It's a lot of trial and error. I mean, I think it was a blessing and a curse that I'd never worked in a plaintiff's firm before. So I didn't know what I didn't know. And I didn't, I just tried to figure things out as I was going along. I mean, I read a bunch. I talked to tons of plaintiffs' attorneys. There's some really valuable, resources and books I remember reading. But at the end of the day, what I have now, and I hate the term volume practice because it makes it sound like it's a mill where everyone's a number. And that's not what I do. But I will say my goal is to reach, there's 17 million renters in California, and there's a handful of firms that do contingency work for tenants. There really aren't that many. And they're almost all in San Francisco and LA. And so there's tons, there's basically an infinite number of cases. So who wouldn't want to work in a practice area where the problem has never been finding clients? It's never been a problem. And even to this day, it's, even at the size we're at, where we have, we need to make sure that we're continuously onboarding, because we don't have recurring revenue clients. We usually just have, they come to us with a problem, and then, we help them out, and then they go on their way. But having it is, I think, the most valuable, besides attorneys, which you have to have in a law firm to prosecute the cases, right? To actually prosecute the claims. The most important people in my firm right now are our finance team. I don't want to offend anyone on our team, but I would say they're all important, but it's key and critical to the business operations to make sure you have analysts.
Yeah, they're making projections and figuring out if you're going to run out of money at some point. That sort 100%. Of thing. Yeah.
So it's like but the cool thing about a plaintiff's contingency firm is that at a certain point, you get pretty good at predicting the value and outcomes of cases. So what we're doing now is, I used to just, that sounds really sympathetic. And I know a lot of plaintiffs lawyers work this way. That sounds like a really good case. I'm going to sign it up and we'll see what happens. Well, we're 40 plus people now, and I don't have the luxury of being that cavalier about if it were me, just Eric handling the cases, but I'm not even the managing attorney anymore. Yeah. I'm just full-time CEO. So I have to make sure that things will work out the way they'll work out. So we have a pretty good proprietary system where a case comes in, we get a bunch of information, and we review the evidence. We talk to the client, we interview them. We actually, do searches on asset searches for the landlord. So we actually have a case that comes in. We know what the value is. We have the average time to resolution, and we think we have a pretty good idea of the collectability based on the research we did at the outset. So it's less risky. And I would say that we have been able to, I don't want to say crack the code, but I understand the formula pretty well. And so there's less risk.
And probably as you add more cases, then that kind of spreads out the risk. If you've got 5 cases and none of them, settle or go to trial in a year-long period, you've got no incoming revenue. But if you have 50 or 100 cases, then it kind of, I guess, levels out those dips in the valleys.
Yeah. Uh, the more data points, the easier it is to predict. But there have been different challenges like every step of the way, and where we're at now is no exception. But
and an interesting thing is you don't just have like a domestic team with everyone in one office in downtown San Francisco. You actually have a distributed team with people all over, including near shore and outside, and remote staff. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities around building a firm of that stripe.
So they say necessity is the mother of invention. So I found myself in 2019. I didn't have like my projections or my pipeline dialed in as well as I could have. So what I needed to focus in on the short term was, how do I find great team members when I have an office, a brick and mortar office in downtown San Francisco that's super hard to get to? And if someone's just been displaced from their home, like, how are they going to get here? How are they going to get parking? It wasn't very convenient for the clients. And then how do I find, a good non-attorney intake person, a good paralegal, case manager, admin, receptionist? How do I find them? And like, they're not just sitting around in San Francisco. Like, I'd have to hire, so they'd have to come. And I was like, this whole system's kind of messed up, because I'm trying to reach tenants who've been displaced, and I can do the work where people are coming in, they're just sitting at a computer all day, and then they're going at home. So why not just have them never leave? And so I started dabbling with a company called Get Staffed Up in July of 2019. We hired our first staffer. And then, although that I didn't have a system to really set that person up for success, but it worked out great. And it was a remote, a staffer. I think he was in Mexico, our first staffer. Then we hired one in September who's still with the firm, another staffer in December who's still with the firm. And from that point, I said, yeah, we're just going to shift to fully virtual, because these people are doing a great job. They're working really well. And I can, the fact of the matter is, if I can cut out, office rent, or at least, downtown San Francisco office rent, that's going to be great, overhead savings. And then the fact of the matter is, full-time, amazing, top of market, getting paid paralegal in Mexico is still a fraction of the cost of a top of market paralegal in San Francisco. So that helped me on both fronts.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but I want to ask you about AI, because it's what everyone's talking about now as we're recording this in spring of 2025. How do you see AI either helping you in your firm, or I've talked to people that say that, the legal profession is going to be undermined by, I don't know, AI lawyers coming in?
My perspective is that AI is a tool that, if wielded properly, can lead to a massive unfair advantage by the firms that utilize it properly. I think people, especially, so we do litigation, we do plaintiffs work, we represent people. I think people are going to always want people representing them. So I don't think, and the great thing is, the State Bar of California is a guild. They control how many people enter the guild and can practice law. We have a monopoly on the practice of law.
They sure do. Yep.
They sure do. So they're gonna not want to like loosen their grips on that. So I don't. Yeah. I think that there will always be a place for litigators. I think there are other types of lawyers that their jobs, I don't think they'll become obsolete. I just think they'll change. I do think firms will do more with less. I think that this will probably long-term fundamentally change the role of a paralegal, whose job, in my mind, is you're just a drafter. And if drafting is going to like shift, I think the most successful paralegals, I would tell them right now, learn how to draft prompts. That's what's going to make you very successful. Yeah. So in our practice, quickly, and I just say, we handle the same type of case. Like, I'm an inch wide in my practice area, but a mile deep. So we basically look for the same types of factual scenarios, which has lent it to, we're the plaintiffs. We create the same types of complaints, the same types of demands, the same types of discovery. So we have really, really detailed templates and detailed instructions on how to use those templates. So rather than humans, prepare first drafts, we're literally in the process right now, this week, next week, this quarter, of rolling out our first AI, basically paralegals. And we're going to continue. And the cool thing is, we're planning on growing our firm 50 to 100%. Like that's in our budget. That's what we're planning on doing in 2025 over 24 with not much increase in headcount. So it's not as if people are going to get replaced with AI, but they're going to learn to manage the systems, and we're going to basically be redeploying people in the firm. So that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah. Eric, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you if they have any questions?
If they're curious about tenant rights law, Tenant Law Group, www.tenantlawgroupsf.com is our website, and that has all the information about our services. To connect with me personally, it's linkedin.com, and Eric L. Toscano is my LinkedIn handle, would be the best way to connect with me.
And I know you've been sharing a lot of content up there on LinkedIn, so definitely go give Eric a follow on LinkedIn. Cool.
Thank you.
Eric, thanks so much.
John.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast. This episode is powered by Rise 25. Please subscribe and check out future episodes.